Hi, this is Pat Moorhead with Moor Insights Strategy, and we are here for another 6-5 podcast. It is Friday. Daniel, you and I have been on the road most of the week, but here, favorite time of the week, favorite time of the day, two besties pontificating and analyzing the biggest things in tech. How are you, my friend?
Well, good morning. It's been a busy week for the 6-5. But yeah, we do a lot of different kinds of shows. The platform has grown rapidly over the last couple of years. We go on the road, we go to big events, and we do content in the booth. We're providing our analysis everywhere. This week took us up and over from Austin, Texas to Yorktown and Albany, New York. And we are back, but we've done a whole bunch of 6-5 this week. Some that you will see soon, some that you will see later. But the good news, Pat, is they get to see this right now.
Exactly. And here we are. If it's your first time to the 6-5 podcast, we cover 5-6 topics, around 5 to 10 minutes each. A little bit of news, but more analysis. So strap your helmet on. We are about to dive in, and we have some pretty great topics for you today. We have AMD Earnings. We're going to be talking Zoho Analyst Conference. We're going to be talking Micron the world's first 232-layer NAND. We're going to talk on Amazon Sustainability Report 2021 and Nancy. Which Nancy could we be talking about? We're going to be talking Nancy going to Taiwan. So
I came up with that title. It felt like kind of like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Classic movie that everybody's seen. If basically you took a civics class of any type, civics class. Whoa, aging myself. I don't think we call it that anymore. And civility or normalcy, that is out the window in an era of social media, Mr. Moorhead.
That's right. So let's dive into some AMD earnings action. But before that, I just want to remind you that this show is for information and entertainment purposes only. Don't take any of this as investment advice. Let's dive in. AMD, what can we say, Daniel? I'm going to call an audible on that one. I mean, they had an absolute stunning quarter. They had a slight beat on the top. They had a slight beat on the bottom. They held guidance annually for 2022, but they lowered Q3 primarily on the backs of uncertainty of the PC market. They lost between 5 and 7% after hours. They gained a little bit on opening day. The next day, I think it was pretty much a complete overreaction to short-term phenomena. And quite frankly, people aren't taking the long look of AMD, who still has a lot of upside opportunity. First off, you have the GPU opportunity on the consumer and the data center side. And I think as a comparison, you can look to NVIDIA and what they've done on that. You now have AMD in the IPU market through the acquisition of Pensando and Xilinx. And then you have an entire business through the acquisition of Xilinx. And then you have in the future the combination of AMD and Xilinx technologies, particularly in the AI space. Now, I can't invest in AMD, and of course, I don't recommend investments. But I am very bullish on the long-term future of AMD. I mean, heck, let's talk short-term. Let's talk second quarter, right? Data center revenue up 83%. None of that increase is due to Xilinx. All 83% was driven by, was funny, I almost said Opteron, driven by Epic. OpInc up, just 2.3x. We're not talking percentages when we talk about AMD. We're talking about X, okay? Orders of magnitude. Client business, right? These are CPUs and APUs. 25% growth, again, moderate, because we had a moderated quarter out there in the market, driven by Ryzen notebooks. Operating income only up 25%, not bad. 25% of revenue, 25% increase in OpInc. Gaming up 32%, really by consoles. Gaming cards were down. I got to tell you, I'd really like to see what the long-term future is for AMD in PC gaming. I know they have the right people in there, people like Frank Azor in there running that piece. But if I look at the growth that NVIDIA's had, really eclipses what AMD has been able to do. Embedded, brand new segment. I mean, AMD did some embedded, but not a lot, up 2,000%. And again, this is 100% the inclusion of Xilinx. I'm not going to go, batty or crazy over the percent because it was driven by Xilinx. Final comment here. I really do appreciate the new AMD, right? The old AMD was kind of like each quarter it was a different thing, but not every business unit was hitting on all cylinders, right? But with data center, client, gaming, and the new embedded, now with Xilinx, short term, the company is hitting on all cylinders, and I think this is one of these companies that the best is yet to come.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a weird week in the market. I think what happened with AMD was after Intel's really tough quarter, is probably the right word, people kind of maybe overestimated how much of the market shifted over to AMD, and maybe didn't fully appreciate that the slowing demand for the PC was real. Now, in the data center, the results for AMD were pretty remarkable. The company has got things going in the right direction. Very hard to not appreciate the growth and the success that the company is having. The acquisition strategy seems to be pulling it along in the right direction with Pensando, like you said, with IPUs. That's a very important space. The Xilinx business, we're seeing a real stunning growth in demand for FPGAs, and we'll talk about that more when we get to Lattice in a little bit, because they had a remarkably good quarter. So I think that was a little bit of what happened. Now, I do love how, in AMD's press releases, they break things out on a year-over-year basis. So, we all have seen that AMD's sort of PE ratio got a little bit heavy. In fact, at times at 80, 100 plus. And, when you see Intel at sub 10, you're kind of saying that's the market betting on AMD having a very bright future and not so much for other companies. But then, you see like a Qualcomm still at 12 and you're going, well, maybe we're a little over our skis on these valuations. NVIDIA suffers a similar fate. So at times, the expectations on a quarter basis are so big that a great result isn't good enough. And I think that's what we kind of had happen here. I mean, you look at just some of these numbers, and I like in the release, they really break this out. But year over year, you saw revenue up 70%, profit up 93%, margin went up this quarter. Operating income up 115%, and net income up 119%. So you hit on the head, Pat, where there was weakness. This is cyclical. Anybody that's out there that doesn't believe we saw multiple years of PC sales pulled forward is naive. Now, that's not to say that the hybrid work trends won't continue to see a higher volume of PC sales than maybe before, but at some point, everybody has 1, 2, 3 PCs, and there's no more PCs to sell. Yeah. Then you've got cycles, and you just got to wait for the refresh cycles to come through. But that number should remain higher potentially if the workforce doesn't contract significantly. The only other thing I'll say is that, in the data center, the company's strong. Where I'm kind of watching out for AMD and Intel, respectively, has just been the momentum for ARM. There's a lot of interest in ARM right now. That hasn't changed. You're seeing the cloud hyperscalers making big investments. Ampere, you've heard updates from Microsoft, Google, Amazon. And I think we're going to start seeing more data on that soon, on how much that actually represents. And as that data becomes available, we're going to have to understand that that's going to create market share shifts for both AMD and Intel. However, AMD is clearly executing well. Even though they're a couple quarters behind on their newest products, they're still getting it out faster than their competitor in Intel, which the Sapphire Rapids delay was probably the number one reason for the shortfall this quarter. So great quarter for AMD. Momentum continues to be good. And by the way, you had a great little appearance on CNBC. We'll put that in the show notes, Pat. I got to throw my buddy here a little bit of lob of praise. So everybody that wants to kind of get the quick take instead of listening to me garbling on for 4 minutes, check out Pat's CNBC segment. So that's it.
No, I appreciate that. And Daniel, just a little bit of a boomerang. AMD did have an ARM-based design about 10 years ago, and they were building kind of their I/O that could work both with x86 and an ARM core. AMD abandoned that for various reasons. I believe that they did that because of focused resources. I don't think that there's going to be a lot of pressure for ARM in the data center until there's nothing magical about the ARM instruction set compared to x86. You just need to put the time and the energy to focus on low power versus performance. I think both Apple and Amazon have showed that you can have your cake and eat it too, and you could find the right I/O to connect to an ARM-based CPU. I can't imagine the amount of cost it would take to create a new custom ARM core, but I could see AMD in the future maybe taking a Neoverse core and putting it into their I/O structure if they couldn't hit the power capabilities. It would take a hit on profitability, but if the market does start to move and there's a preference for ARM-based core, AMD is a very pragmatic company. With Xilinx, all of Xilinx SoCs that they have in the data center have an ARM compute core on them. And in the Q&A in the deal, when AMD bought Xilinx, CEO Lisa Su said she's agnostic on ISA. So there we go. Next up, a very different type of topic here. Now, why it's called Zoho Day when it's 2 to 3 days, I don't know. But Daniel, what happened at their analyst conference here in Austin, Texas?
Yeah. So what's that now? Not this week, but last week. We had so much hit the wire last week with our earnings palooza that we had to back this one out a week, but I don't think it was that time sensitive. But you and I in Austin, thank you, Zoho, had the opportunity to attend Zoho Day and get an update. Now, Zoho, for those that are unfamiliar, is a high growth, basically business application suite. Zoho One is what it's most appropriately titled as, but it has somewhere around 50 different applications that companies, and I would say it was historically SMB, but it's grown to be really more SME and now even a little more ME. And that was one of the big takeaways is the company, because it's been with its customer for many years now, are starting to go up market as it diversifies its offering. So we're talking about having ERP and CRM and project management and having, Zoho meetings, having analytics, AI embedded, collaboration, a marketing stack. This is really the full turnkey offering for that sort of mid-sized company. Can work for very small. And now, as I suggested, it also can work for very large. We heard from the CEO, we heard from the founders, we heard from the executives. And the company, I thought did a nice job of giving a little bit of a under the hood look. As you know, Zoho is a private company. Private companies don't have to disclose anything. So we didn't get necessarily the specifics of the revenue that we could actually do any sort of comparison. But we did get some interesting growth comparisons, as you're flashing up here on the screen right now, for those not on the visual podcast and watching, where Zoho was basically able to show that it was growing very quickly, specifically against some of the other competitors in the space. It looked at Atlassian, Freshworks, HubSpot, Microsoft, Oracle, Salesforce. It was interesting, Pat, because I remember I raised my hand and said, "Can we share this?" And they said, "Absolutely." And usually that kind of stuff surprises me. The company has, been able to show some consistent growth in its revenue. It's saying over 35%, which is impressive. It's growing more along with the newer IPOs and newer companies, and it's outpacing the growth, at least as it provided in its comparisons. Now, Pat, you and I have not validated this data, so I want to say we're using their data right now.
That's right.
Based upon the reviews of earnings that we have done, I can speak for Salesforce and Oracle. These are pretty right on about overall revenue growth. But I think Oracle would raise its hand a little bit in debate if you got into NetSuite, which is probably
Exactly.
more the direct comparison. And that's been growing closer to 30% continuously over the last several quarters that I've analyzed. But I guess as Zoho, there was so much content. A couple of things I'll point out. One is really interesting debate. Can't say much specifically about it, about why the company has decided to remain private. Company does a lot of things in ESG, has a very strong stance on privacy, and their CEO basically shared with us that yes, that's been a consideration, that going public has been something the company has looked at. Obviously, a high growth subscription-based service would make for an attractive public company, but due to sort of how the company wants to prioritize itself, it has opted not to take that route. And I'll just touch on one other thing. This is really a global company. They shared some data. I mean, this company has, I believe it's more than a dozen offices distributed around the world. They have a pretty significant customer growth rate, a low churn rate in terms of its customers. And really, it does set itself out to be easy to use. And so, again, private companies, Pat, always create a little bit more of a challenge for us to try to really provide our analysis on their performance. In terms of the solution set, though, we all know that there's only 500 Fortune 500 companies. And so while so many technology companies sort of build their products to support that group and the group that is near sized to that group, Zoho really feels different in the fact that really it was purpose built to serve that small and mid market. It's growing up and becoming bigger. And as always, it's always enjoyable to hear from the company. But without more actual revenue data, it's hard to say exactly how well the company is doing.
Good assessment, Daniel. Yeah, Zoho is a very interesting anomaly in the world of SaaS applications, right? It has a very good growth, but it has zero aspirations of going public. And it's funny when you step back and listen to the key leadership talk about why it doesn't want to. It's very clear. I mean, it says it will have to do things that it wouldn't want to do because they know they would have to satisfy shareholders. The one thing I want to point out, though, is that the company's strategy that it laid out close to a decade ago, ironically, is the strategy that all of the biggest B2B ecosystems are headed down, whether it's Google, Microsoft, or Salesforce. And that's this notion of a full stack approach that goes all the way from hardware, the infrastructure, to those SaaS applications at the very end and everything in between. Now, Salesforce won't ever get there on their own unless they would buy an infrastructure company, as they're leveraging Azure and AWS for their infrastructure. But when I look at Google and Microsoft, this is exactly what they're doing and striving for. This is kind of a little an interesting thing. Microsoft doesn't actually have a consistent infrastructure that it sits on with its SaaS apps. Office 365 is on a different infrastructure, as is Teams and its video properties. Because it was built up, there's some history there, and they had different teams working on it. So I guess as I'm backing into this, maybe only Zoho and Google have a consistent infrastructure that it's sitting upon. And why does that matter? Other than just having a bullet point, is you have one throat to choke, right? If you own every part of the stack, you can optimize your experience, right? If you have some challenges on the software side, you can make it up on the hardware side. If you have challenges on the hardware side, you can make it up on the software side. And you can look your customers straight in the eye and say, yes, I know exactly what's going on here, and this is why I think I can deliver you a better experience. Awesome. It's all good. Hey, no, this is live. This happens on our podcast. So.
Good catch, Pat. Now I'm going to shut this thing down.
No, it's all good. So very similar. Daniel shared with you some of the things that were public, but Daniel and I both saw NDA slides. We saw 13 years of registrations. We saw 8 years of paid customers. We saw 9 years of revenue growth. We saw monthly churn. We saw geo revenue diversity. I can't share any of it with you, but I just want to tell you that it is impressive. The one thing, though, Daniel, and I'll reiterate that we don't have the actual dollar number. I don't know. I don't know why that matters. Maybe it should. Maybe it doesn't. But we are very inquisitive people. So overall, a good conference. I got to talk to number one. Got to talk to the CEO like you did, and got to talk to most of the executive staff there. The access was great. You could just kind of bump. Sridhar wasn't in the country, unfortunately, but that was the only senior executive that I wanted to talk to face that I didn't get to talk to. Good job, Zoho. Keep up the good work. And by the way, Zoho has been part of the 6.5 Summit for a couple of years, and be sure to check that out.
Appreciate the partnership.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move to the next topic. Again, we are going all over the place. We're going from semi-earnings to B2B SaaS to 232-layer NAND that Micron brought out. World's first, which I think they deserve a little bit more than a golf clap.
Well, let me get my notebook out. I got to take notes here. This is a learning experience for me as well. Dial it in.
So let me just give, first of all, NAND is high performance storage, and that can be in a smartphone, that can be in a PC, or that can be in a data center, right? And Daniel, I know you're gonna talk a little bit more about why this even matters, big picture and the growth opportunity. But what happens is the more layers that you can stack on top of each other in storage, the higher the density. So essentially what the company did is put almost 2x the density inside the same amount of space on the piece of silicon. And that's nearly twice the density of Samsung. And that's nearly twice the density of Kioxia. Not that someday those folks will get there, but being first does count for more. I had a great conversation with head of the group, Jeremy Werner. I always like to say Werner because they speak German. But anyways, had a great conversation with Jeremy about how this is going to roll out into PCs and into the data center. Also had a great conversation with one of their end customers in the data center, Bill Sarita from Pure Storage. And as you know, Pure is one of the only companies that takes raw storage and turns that into storage devices inside of the data center. And they do some really cool stuff with software to improve the reliability, let's say on QLC memory, to make it operate as reliably as DLC and SLC. So that's single layer, dual layer, and quad. So, but they're also, they have this software wizardry, and I urge you to check out the YouTube video that I did with these two folks. But congratulations to Micron. They're really on a roll. First to DDR5 and getting that productized. First now to 232-layer NAND and storage. Great job.
Yeah, I first of all really enjoyed your article on Forbes and your interview. I spend half of my free time consuming content that you create without me. A little bit of jealousy, but what else can I do, my friend? I was actually reading through this though, and I highlighted something because I thought it was great. So for all of our audience, we understand some of you are extremely technical, some of you are on the business end, some of you are here to learn. So I thought Werner made a great analogy and you talked about in your article where you talked about kind of thinking about memory and thinking about the 232-layer NAND like real estate. And so in a dense metropolitan area, you can't build wider. Think about the large wafer. you have to build vertically. Think about stacking, which is becoming an increasingly important trend. So in a downtown area and a highly dense in New York City, you don't build out, you build up. A little bit like 232-layer NAND. He thinks of it like a skyscraper. Creates more density in layer. 3D NAND, is basically enabling Micron to scale and build more efficient skyscrapers. I thought that was great. I mean, like I said, Pat, I read your writing and then I just sort of copy paste to make great analysis.
Buddy, some days you're so gracious and some days you're not.
Yeah,
well, I do read. I do hit up some of your research. I'll admit.
It's a Friday. I'm feeling good. And frankly, like I said, I admit when I'm in the learning mode. We were sitting in those quantum briefings this week and I felt like a student in grad school again. I mean, and I felt like a student taking a class that I didn't know a lot about in grad school. And we're considered two of the foremost thinkers in quantum as analysts, and this stuff is hard. Well, some of this semiconductor stuff is hard too. Just take a tour of a large semiconductor plant and actually look around at the equipment, the lithography, all the things that are happening. And you're going, holy cow, this is so complex. What was it, Pat? We're aiming laser beams at stuff. I mean, this stuff is amazing. And the beauty of it is in the end, it's all about usability. And so, what Micron is really doing is enabling the compute and data center of the future to be able to keep up with data and storage innovation and make sure that computing can keep up. And that's really what's happening here. And to your point, Micron's been very on the front end. They're very innovative and they understand their role in this particular space. And these breakthroughs are really important. But in the end, they're really important because when you're serving up these applications, you have all this data you need to access in order to do meaningful work in these applications. Storage and memory are an incredibly important part of that. And Micron, to your point, is continuing to move this forward. I will end there because I think I've hopefully broken this down to the layman a little bit here. But great job to Micron.
Let's move to another semiconductor story here. Lattice Earnings, the leader in market share in high volume, low power FPGAs.
Yeah, if I knew how to throw up a slide, somehow after all this time, I'm still terrible at it. But Lattice does give some good slide. They give great slide at their earnings. In this particular quarter, the company did it again. The one slide, the results highlight, Pat, I'm just going to call a little bit of this out because, in the market, when right now we're in this sort of in this bubble where I say it's alpha versus beta, like we've heard our friend Shamath Palihapitiya say on the All In podcast. Lattice is in a stage of alpha, made a lot of great decisions. So congratulations to Jim Anderson and his team to basically focus the business on key seculars, focused on edge, focused on automotive, focused on data center. And it's starting to, bear fruit for the company. So you saw 28% year-on-year growth, 69% margin, which it considers 700 basis points of expansion, and huge growth in its earnings per share, 68% for those of you that can't see the screen. But what was really great is, as expected, the markets they were in that are high growth, that are going to be resilient and robust through any sort of period of contraction, continue to grow. 35% year over year in their compute and communication compute. So that's what we talked about there. And then, of course, their industrial and automotive business, the hardened edge and the automobiles also saw 30%. Surprising that we saw a small but, 1% contraction in consumer. You shouldn't be surprised. Just listen to what we talked about when we talked about AMD and Intel. That particular space is taking its lumps right now. It also gave the company some solid growth over their previous periods when we did see all the acceleration into areas like consumer and PC. And Pat, what I think is most interesting about the company is it's been very aggressive in its innovation. It's it's got the small FPGA platform. It's moved up into mid-market. It's got an ORAN solution. It's got security and BIOS solutions to help companies protect their data center. They've made some good inorganic acquisitions, small but meaningful in areas like AI to expand the business. And frankly, the company has proven that FPGAs are having a moment. So Pat, you've heard me say this a few times on our different pods. Semiconductors are having a moment. Well, FPGAs are also having a moment. That's why I think we feel good about AMD and Xilinx. And I think that's also why we feel really good about Lattice is FPGAs are proving that they can be done, they can be affordable, they can provide a layer and level of flexibility, and that companies are increasingly adopting them. And just so everyone knows, in case you don't follow Lattice, we don't talk about them as often as some of the other bigger semiconductor companies, but we do talk about them somewhat regularly. This is a company that's products and solutions are in alongside many of those bigger names. They're in alongside an AMD or an Intel in a data center. They're in alongside an NVIDIA. They're in alongside. So this isn't an or thing. This isn't some small semiconductor trying to grab market share from the big semi companies. This is a company that has very specific purpose-built solutions in these industries that we mentioned, and they're getting a lot of momentum, a lot of growth, and they've been able to really hold up well throughout the pandemic.
Wow. You actually did leave me a lot of content.
I did, right?
For sure. So one thing I want to point out, and let me share this. Let me share this screen real quick. Oh boy. Hang on a second. There we go. If you're a company, if you're an investor and you're looking for a long-term play, and listen, I'm not an investor. I don't give investment advice, but look at this curve. Look at the steady progress. And here's the irony. All of this had to do with a major change in product direction and product velocity. What Jim Anderson and his team did is they completely changed the target markets that they went after. They still service some of the consumer markets, but they really took a hard right, very similar to Marvell, on more B2B type of opportunities. And we can debate whether automotive is consumer or commercial, but you get the idea. And changing investment, increasing velocity, you very rarely see curves like this. Now, it's great and all to talk about what happened today and what happened yesterday, but let's hit tomorrow. You had talked a little bit about getting into the mid-range. They haven't launched their product yet, but what they did say on their earnings call is that in Q4, they are going to have an event to talk about this. And you can see the graph up there. It's essentially doubling their TAM. And this is going right at the heart of what Intel and now AMD FPGAs provide. But there's a big difference here, okay? AMD and Intel FPGA, they're really focused on using the FPGA as a way to create data center SoCs. And they're also focused on the highest performance FPGAs, not bringing new solutions out in the mid-range. What Avant is a brand new product in the mid-range of FPGA. So in the marketplace, you're going to have AMD and Intel with older designs and older manufacturing versus Avant, which is a newer design with newer manufacturing. Now, what Xilinx and AMD have going for them is typically when you build in an FPGA, if it's in a single board computer or something like that, very rarely do people have the motivation to change. But I believe that Avant will win many of the new designs because, quite frankly, it's going to have a cost, performance, and power advantage. That's me speculating right now, but it's just, why else would Lattice be investing so much to get in here? The only thing I don't 100% agree with you on, Daniel, is it's competing with other FPGAs only. I believe that with these packs, with these software packs, Jim and his team are actually going against controllers, okay? And that's just a fancy way of saying low-level ARM processors and ASICs, right? For, let's say, machine learning, right? So I do think at some point, and by making it easier for OEMs and ODMs, they are going to have to, and they will start going, head on against other types of silicon, not GPUs. Okay, that's not going to happen, but against more against ASICs and controllers.
Whew. Yeah. So just quick, you hit that on the head. I guess I wasn't. I'm not correcting myself, but I do want to just say, of course, there's always overlap. There's always going to be overlap. I just mean that for people that are a little bit less familiar with a Lattice, this isn't the kind of company where you're basically saying, "Oh, NVIDIA is so good, Lattice doesn't have a chance." They're very aware of where they fit in the market, and they've been able to capitalize very well on the fact that they understand their purpose. They understand where FPGAs make a lot of sense, and they've been able to enter the market. Definitely going to have some competition. And by the way, if you get bigger, competition is inevitable. The bigger you get, the more your products find their way into markets, the bigger competition is going to look for ways to capitalize on that market. So good points. I appreciate that kind of circle back here, Pat. And I know we got to keep moving.
Yeah, let's dive into the next topic, which is Amazon's 2021 sustainability report. I have I have a report that sorry, not my sustainability report. I have an analysis on the report that's going to drop probably in the next couple days. I've really spent a lot of time on it, and it's interesting. We're in an interesting time right now related to all of this environmental, and that's what I'm going to focus on is the environmental piece. A lot of things are going on right now. I mean, the environmental debate rages. We've got heat waves on at least 2 continents, and we have the EU being held hostage by Russia because essentially EU essentially handed over to Russia their energy policy. So I would say environmental and energy debate absolutely rages on. So, but I think companies are trying to be part of the solution out there and try to have a leadership role, if nothing else, to maybe consume less energy when they're doing what they're doing. Companies like Amazon get a lot more scrutiny for its sustainability reports because, quite frankly, it's marketplace success, right? It has a ton of data centers with AWS, right? They're the number one IaaS provider. They're the number one e-tailer out there in the globe. And they're one of the largest grocery sellers out there in the United States with Whole Foods. They have hundreds of distribution centers. They have fleets of delivery trucks and planes. So net, and I think some of the focus, Daniel, has been this 18% increase in carbon. And I know some people were like, oh my gosh, that's terrible, right? But then it's like, well, let's actually see what did Amazon do in 2021 in compared to that 18%. Well, let me read off a few things that I found out. First of all, almost doubled their workforce, adding 750,000 workers, doubled its package fulfillment network, increased package delivery 500%, and increased usage of AWS by 40%. So, I don't know. I'm not a mathematician, Daniel, but when I compare orders of magnitude, 5x, 2x, 4x, and compare that to 18% to carbon footprint, the companies, this isn't an official term, it's my term, carbon efficiency actually looks incredible. So, and listen, the company's not done there. They outlined things that they're going to be doing over the next, 10 years to bring those numbers down even farther. So net, orders of magnitude growth in the company, 18% increase in carbon footprint. I call that a win.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. And there's a lot to digest. We'll put a link in the show note to your article. I also linked to it in a Market Watch piece where I did talk about its recent release. We went up and have been following, and we can go up, but we followed up in Chicago, the Rivian rollout of some of the electric vehicles for delivery. This is a company that has to balance the reality of staggering revenue growth, staggering shipment volume increases, and somehow being able to manage the expectations for doing ESG. We've all seen the company's efforts to increase awareness, its climate pledge to move things forward, which has brought in some of the world's most important and largest companies to participate in their ambitions to lower the carbon footprint over the next couple of decades. And so I'm not going to sit here and scrutinize Amazon for not being able to on the fly increase revenue. Okay, just there was a note in one of the articles that read something like in 19 they're up 40% since 19. Well, their revenue in 19 was 290 billion, and their revenue in 21 was well over 400 billion, and it's only growing. So you've doubled or coming on doubling your revenue, and you've increased your carbon by about 18%. Means you've actually done quite a bit to reduce based upon the revenue and volume acceleration. We like to sit on our couches and have stuff delivered to us. Well, that doesn't happen without planes, trains, containers, ships, automobiles, scooters, whatever it is that these packages are coming to our door. So there's work to be done. And so things like the electric vehicles are a path forward. But, when we're ordering all this stuff that gets manufactured in China, here's a policy issue. Well, we manufacture a lot of our stuff not here. Well, could we lower our carbon footprint if we didn't do everything as an import? I mean, that might help. But the reality is that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. So what we have to understand is that the process of elimination of carbon emissions is going to take some time. The company is going to be able to do it by improving the footprint of their facilities, by improving the modalities to get packages to people's doors. Electrification will matter, but of course, all those batteries are going to have to go somewhere. We still got an issue that we've got to solve for there in the long run. But I actually appreciate the fact that, I don't think there's a requirement for companies to put these out, these sustainability reports. The fact that Amazon was, didn't really try to mask the result should be seen as a somewhat positive. I think they're owning the result. They own that this type of growth does not come with an easy path to becoming carbon negative in terms of output. So hopefully for every other company on the planet that doubles revenue, they can do it with half the emissions, and then we'll get there. But long and short, Pat, interesting report, good info, fast growth company, work to be done, but it seems like a lot of work is being done, and some credit should be given for the amount of growth and the small amount of additional emission, because like I said, this is not an overnight process.
Good analysis, Daniel. I think we are lockstep on this topic. Let's move to the next topic. Normally we're talking about companies and things that are happening, but we really thought it was important this week to talk about a very important topic related to tech, and that is that Nancy Pelosi visits Taiwan. So why does this have anything to do with tech, Daniel, and why are we even talking about this?
Oh, boy. Well, I mean, you and I spent some time in Albany this week. We were meeting with semiconductor research leadership with IBM, but, the state of New York is very invested. We've id a new $52 billion CHIPS Act that's going to have another few $100 billion dedicated to research. And all this stuff ties together. Why did the CHIPS Act become so interesting and popular? Well, it turns out like 99.9% of our leading edge chip capacity is in Asia now, and the vast majority of it is in Taiwan. I think Taiwan accounted for in 2021 50% of all semiconductor manufacturing revenue. We saw our output in the United States in 1990 drop from 37% to less than 10%. And so it's become a bit of a political issue, considering, Pat, nothing we do, including this podcast, could happen without chips. So I know everyone wants to say software eats the world, but you and I like to say semiconductors eat the world, because you can't run software on air. So you're right, we're not a policy show, but this particular moment had people in a bit of an uproar. So we've got this sort of balancing issue going on right now. So there is the diplomacy challenge with Taiwan, because China still considers Taiwan part of China. And the US knows the importance of Taiwan and its role as an independent nation, a sovereign nation. And so we have to kind of balance this deal of deciding our own foreign policy, letting our relationship with China dictate our foreign policy, because obviously we have a lot of things going to and fro China, and we depend on that on China for a lot of different things. But just this morning, Pat, up in my Twitter feed shows up China announces sanctions against Nancy Pelosi following Taiwan visit. That's in my Twitter feed this morning. Xi Jinping is doing military exercises around Taiwan right now because China considered Nancy's visit to be a conflict of our diplomacy and our relationship with Taiwan, and it is raising the military profile right now. So I guess it comes down to, Pat, talking about something that's very important, and that's, does the United States dictate its own foreign policy, or is this going to be dictated by China? Clearly, the decision for Pelosi to visit showed that we're going to dictate our own, which is something I feel a little bit positive about. But then I wonder who really is the right representative to be there, because what I can't figure out is what the value equation is of sending her. Especially if the chips and the semiconductors are the most important negotiating point between our diplomatic relations that are going on with China and Taiwan at this point. But Pat, long and short of it is all of the stuff that we like to use, the laptops, the cell phones, the data center and servers. I mean, of course, we manufacture more lagging edge, more 14 plus outside of Taiwan, but we've become hyper dependent on Taiwan. And if China decides to have a moment with Taiwan, similar to the moment we saw Russia have with Ukraine, we have a bigger problem on our hands, because our dependency on China and Taiwan is exponentially higher than our dependency on Russia and Ukraine. And you saw the outpour of economic damage that caused. So it's a big deal. It's a big moment. Are we sending the right person? Do we have the right strategy? How does the CHIPS Act get us off of this dependency on Taiwan? It won't be immediate. But the long-term, Pat, is that this is going to be a continued on challenge that people want to put their head in the sand and say doesn't exist. But at any point, it could be extremely damaging to our economy.
I don't know where to start. I'm going to start right here. Third in succession after the president is Nancy Pelosi, right? So you have Biden, Harris, and then Nancy Pelosi, right? Biden certainly wouldn't make the trip because that would probably be too strong of a signal to send. I don't think anybody wants Harris to go anywhere and represent the country, because quite frankly, I don't think she even has a grasp on the CHIPS Act or economics that go into it. So that's one of the things I think that's important. But this does beg the question: what would the U.S. be willing to go to war over? Right? Are we willing to go to war over a Chinese invasion or shooting missiles that actually hit land in Taiwan or not? But getting back to the technology point of it, so there is still leading edge fabbing going on inside of the U.S. Right? Intel has Intel 7 here in the U.S. and Micron has leading edge memory fabs. But the challenge is the future, where it looks like TSMC and Samsung have the lead. And as technologists, we have to ask the question: is it smart or is it just way too risky to have the longest pole in the tent to deliver an end product be something that is fabbed in countries that missiles are literally flying over the land? North Korea is popping off missiles over South Korea, and now you have China popping off missiles over Taiwan into the South China Sea. It's just too much risk, and if anything, it just puts a big exclamation point on the CHIPS Act and why we have to bring more of this leading edge manufacturing and manufacturing for more analog devices that doesn't require leading edge, but does require specialty type of processes and technologies. And I'll go even a step further and say stopping at chips doesn't solve much. okay, stopping at chips, because most of what we build in our critical infrastructure has a lot of its genesis in China, right? Final manufacturing, a lot of it is done in China. Now, the military is a little bit different, but I'm talking about banking, I'm talking about healthcare, and I'm talking about telecommunications. Why do you think China basically banned US companies from operating in Chinese critical infrastructure, right? But we still keep propping up China and doing business as US companies with critical infrastructure with China. And I think now's the time where I think the US government and states need to pass some sort of law or regulation. Again, similar to China. I'm not picking on China here, just doing exactly what China does to us, which is having all critical infrastructure, all the way from chips to final assembly, done outside of China or in a country that we feel safe around, like Mexico, right? I think that would be a great place. We can't afford to do that in the United States. We could very much protect Mexico if somebody tried to invade it. The other thing I'd like to see, Daniel, is China has a rule that you can't own more than 49% of a company if you open up in China. So if you and I wanted to open up a place in China, 51% of that has to be owned by a China entity, right? Chinese companies can open up in the U.S. with reckless abandon. They don't need an investor. They can also buy land, right, which they have in Texas next to military sites, without any oversight at all. Listen, I don't like bureaucracy. I don't like government overstepping, but let's just get smart about this. How can we not view this as a threat?
Yeah, you hit it on the head, Pat. And we're not 100% aligned here, but I think we've got a lot of common vision here for what needs to be done. It's a fascinating topic. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer, but we're going to see how this plays out over the next few years.
All right, Daniel, good show. Appreciate that. I know you've got a lot of stuff to do today. You're a busy guy. You got to pop out of here.
As are you, my friend.
I know. I only have one keynote and 3 podcasts and 2 advisories. That's my day today. So
you are not busy. That's a light day for Pat, but for me, much busier. So hey, great show.
Hope you enjoyed the show, everybody. If you liked what you heard or saw, please hit that subscribe button. And if there are things you didn't like about the show, you can get those to Daniel. If you like what you heard, please tell me on Twitter. So with that, we'd like to wish you a great weekend to all our fans out here. And man, we bumped into a fan in Albany yesterday, and it was amazing. Really warmed my heart. So thanks, everybody. You can all be fans. We want to hear from you. Take care.